Hi everyone, my name is Megan, and I will be talking about the ecosystem level carbon dioxide responses to increased atmospheric nitrogen deposition in an Ontario meadow hayfield of varying soil texture. I suspect some of you may be wondering, oh God, why grasslands? And better yet, why the poor cousin of grasslands, a hay meadow? Yes, it's true, most of the plants all look the same until you spend a month or so individually collecting blades of grass. And yes, beneath the surface of the grasses are some much more sinister artifacts, like poison ivy and a truly harrowing number of ticks. But I'm here to show you how important grasslands are, and in particular, the significance they hold in potential carbon sequestration and the global carbon budget. Grasslands cover between 25 to 40% of the Earth's surface and account for about 12% of the global terrestrial carbon pool, making them an important ecosystem type in managing the global carbon balance. Due to high biomass and rapid turnover of fine roots characteristic of temperate grasslands, the resulting carbon input to the soil makes this ecosystem type one of the most important terrestrial carbon sinks that could be utilized to mitigate climate change. However, despite nitrogen being a critical nutrient to sustain life, substantial nitrogen inputs from the atmosphere are harmful in many ways and cause habitat degradation through acidification, eutrophication, and creating conditions that favor invasive species. For example, nitrogen deposition rates in the Netherlands currently range between 30 to 40 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. This is about a 70-fold increase compared to pre-industrial deposition rates. These high nitrogen inputs in the Netherlands have contributed to the rapid degradation of the natural heathland ecosystem and a significant loss of dominant natural species. But we're not in the Netherlands, we're in Ontario. So what's the issue here? Well, Ontario is currently experiencing atmospheric nitrogen deposition levels of approximately 10 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, and this is expected to increase to about 25 kilograms by the year 2050. Nitrogen deposition has important implications for soil health, vegetation and crop quality, and nutrient cycling, impacting both the farming industry and the long-term stability of the ecosystem. And yes, I mean even the poor cousin of the grassland ecosystems, the hayfield. Research articulating the components of above-ground plant responses to chronic nitrogen additions in grassland communities have been well documented and indicate productivity increases while species richness tends to decrease. This is crucial and can range in its implications for conservation of grassland diversity, carbon storage and sequestration, and crop quality for Ontario farmers. Before we get into the finer details, I'm going to go over a couple things about carbon fluxes so that we're all on the same page. Net ecosystem exchange refers to the net difference in carbon exchange between the land and the atmosphere. Net ecosystem exchange is important because it indicates whether the environment is acting as a net sink or source for carbon dioxide. There are two component fluxes that make up net ecosystem exchange. Gross ecosystem production represents the uptake of atmospheric carbon dioxide via photosynthesis. So what carbon is being taken up from the atmosphere by plants and put into the biosphere. Ecosystem respiration refers to the release of carbon dioxide from soil microbes, plants, and animals back into the atmosphere. Nitrogen fixation is the process by which atmospheric dinitrogen is converted to ammonium. Once nitrogen is fixed, it can be used for the synthesis of amino acids within the organism fixing it, taken up by plants, or released to the environment through denitrification or leaching. Biological nitrogen fixation was the principal source of atmospheric dinitrogen conversion during the pre-industrial period, with the amount of nitrogen fixed globally being about the same as the amount that was denitrified and converted back to dinitrogen. Lightning was and continues to be a relatively insignificant source of reactive nitrogen, making it pretty cool, but also irrelevant for the purpose of this talk. Now, global nitrogen fixation is dominated by fossil fuel combustion, which has increased fluxes of these compounds to the atmosphere between 6 and 7-fold since the pre-industrial period. Additionally, animal husbandry and the production and application of fertilizer have tripled the flux of ammonia and doubled the flux of nitrogen oxide from the land to the atmosphere. Overall, the continued intensification of anthropogenic activities and subsequent increase in atmospheric nitrogen deposition is likely to cause an ecologically significant fertilization effect and may be able to substantially alter grassland terrestrial carbon cycling, affecting soil carbon stocks. The potential for nitrogen deposition to alter the carbon cycle in a way that produces either a positive or negative feedback is uncertain and relies on a whole slew of factors such as vegetation, microbes, and organic matter decomposition. Soil moisture, temperature, soil texture, and nitrogen availability, on the other hand, are controls of these factors and can influence the relative strength that each factor will have over the net carbon flux. Soil properties are likely to play an important role in mediating ecosystem-level responses to atmospheric nitrogen deposition. Soil texture strongly influences the availability of water and nutrients to plants and microbes due to differences in total surface area of the particles. Soil texture might be an important determinant of biological responses to atmospheric nitrogen deposition, but our current understanding is rather limited. Nitrogen, on the other hand, is a key limiting nutrient to plants, and the degree to which plants can grow and photosynthesize hinges partially on the amount of nitrogen available to them. There is an important caveat here, however. You could say that all plants aren't necessarily made equal, and that the ability of different species to capitalize on the available nitrogen varies. This means that any increase in nitrogen is going to show a range in responses, with some plants responding more favorably than others. This nuance is important to note because it can arise specifically due to differences between species, but also can be due to a complicated array of interactions that occur between various abiotic factors as well. You can see this is shown in my diagram here. And importantly, I'd like to note the interaction depicted between soil texture and nitrogen availability, because this interaction forms the core of my hypothesis. Getting back to the real kicker of it all, if the factors influencing carbon source are stronger than the factors influencing the sink, then you will have a net source of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. The same logic applies to the reverse. Therefore, a detailed understanding of the factors influencing carbon fluxes in grasslands is critical to accurately predict the future carbon balance. To address this knowledge gap, I've created my main objective, which is to determine the relative impacts of low-level, long-term nitrogen addition and soil texture on net ecosystem exchange and its component fluxes. Specifically, I hypothesize that the interaction between nitrogen addition and soil texture will be the most significant determinant of net ecosystem exchange and its component fluxes on clay soils, but that soil texture alone will be the primary determinant of fluxes on sandy soils. My research took place at Stokes Field, which is a research property owned by the Queen's University Biological Station, located in Eastern Ontario. Stokes Field is an actively managed field meadow site, which has been harvested for hay once per year at the end of the growing season in late July or early August since 1976, when it was first acquired by Queen's. Prior to that, the field was used for agriculture and was likely sown with timothy grass, tall fescue, and red clover. Currently, the vegetation is primarily composed of species such as smooth brome, timothy grass, and cow vetch. The simulated enhanced atmospheric nitrogen deposition experiment was set up in 2005 and consists of 12 nitrogen addition plots distributed in 2 rows of 6 from north to south across the length of the field. All the nitrogen addition plots are fertilized in late May of each year. The soil texture at Stokes generally differs between the lower half of the field, where plots 1 to 6 are composed of clay-based soil, and the upper half of the field, where plots 7 to 12 are made up of a high sand content. Here are some pictures of some of the main things we did last summer. The component fluxes of net ecosystem exchange were measured once per week over June and July, using a LI-COR infrared gas analytical system fitted with a customized ecosystem flux chamber. Plant biomass and community composition were measured at each flux sampling plot through a biomass harvest in August. A subsection of root biomass for each harvested plot was also collected for insights into above and below ground biomass ratios. I won't touch on the biomass in my preliminary results, but as you can see, there's lots of exciting things to come. Since my analysis is still in its preliminary phase, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what we're seeing in terms of fluxes. On the x-axis are the months over which I measured the fluxes, and on the y-axis are the values of net ecosystem exchange, where values above 0 indicate a net carbon source. So when there is more carbon dioxide going to the atmosphere than into the biosphere. And any value below 0 is a net carbon sink. So when there is overall more carbon dioxide being taken up into the biosphere than there is being emitted into the atmosphere. Overall, we see that the treatment and control on both soil textures tends to take up more carbon as the growing season progresses. What is interesting here, however, is that there are no treatment differences on sandy soils, depicted in the two different blues. This suggests that there is another factor in this area that is limiting plant productivity and subsequent carbon uptake. On the clay soils, however, there does appear to be a pattern emerging between the treatment and control, but it's not what we expected. What appears to be happening here is that the control continues to take up more carbon compared to the nitrogen treatment until we near peak biomass in July. This is an emerging pattern, and more work needs to be done to fully understand this. This and many other burning questions are what awaits me over the next month or so as I work through my data to better understand these processes. The research I am proposing here will build on previous findings through a detailed investigation of the interaction between soil texture and atmospheric nitrogen deposition in determining plant community structure and functioning. Specifically, investigation into metrics of plant community diversity, productivity, and carbon fluxes will help provide a baseline understanding of how plant species growing on different soil textures will vary in response to nitrogen deposition. My goal is that my research will help to refine estimates of land-based carbon emissions and sinks in grasslands to improve predictive models, as well as to educate communities, stakeholders, and policymakers on terrestrial carbon cycling in Canada. My hope is that by enabling these outcomes and allowing them to interact, my research will help conservation and farming practices work together to manage grasslands in a way that will optimize species diversity for conservation value, crop quality, and carbon sequestration. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.